Oh boy, how sweet it is. Yes, indeed. How sweet it is to be back. I was on vacation. I think I needed it, and I also think I needed to come back. I did keep my eye on events here in America. I was overseas. I'll tell you about it later. When I found out that John Bolton was in trouble, I did a little dance, all right? This guy so deserves it. This looks like it's related to the misuse of classified information and who knows what else, but accountability has been needed for John Bolton for a long time. He was the principal intellectual architect behind the Iraq War fiasco. Weapons of mass destruction, convincing Bush and the rest to go in, pointless war. He never apologized. So many people, blood on their hands, literally, in my opinion. And he still walks around like he's some sort of a genius. And he talks about regime change. He actually has the audacity to talk about the use of force when he doesn't know anything about it. He really should have left government for good after Iraq. But he got himself into the Trump administration. It might have been a stroke of genius after all what President Trump did with this guy. Now that he's out, well, for a while there, he thought he was in the clear and went around trashing Trump every chance he got.
I think he has a fascination with authoritarian leaders generally. I think Trump would like to be a big guy, but I don't think he's smart enough to be a dictator.
So is Trump, what's the term, an idiot?
Well, I think Rex Tillerson had the iconic two-word description of Trump. The first word I won't repeat even on your show, the second of which was moron.
Okay, I'll throw it in there.
That's pretty much on point. That's
yes,
right.
A moron.
Right.
Can a moron still be a useful idiot?
I think the answer to that's yes, and I think Vladimir Putin understands it.
Just a disgraceful performance that undermined national security. This guy shooting his mouth off. It's a free country. You can do these things, I guess. Yeah, you can. But it's just very rich coming from somebody like him. The arrogance and the mistakes, the catastrophes that follow him all around. And somehow he thinks he's the solution to all of America's woes?
I think it's our job to fix the Republican Party from the damage that Trump has done.
And I think he said here, and how do we do that? President Bolton?
If I do get in, it will be to win the nomination, not simply to prove a point. That's a serious, difficult decision to make, and I'm going to consider it in a prudent fashion.
Prudent fashion? Pal, you live in America, all right? No chance whatsoever. But this is what he did. He deluded himself and others about his presidential future and weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and hated President Trump so much that he wrote a book that I think they'll be reading in his trial. The contempt that he has for President Trump. It's deeply personal. And this book came out, in June of 2020. What was happening then? General election. Joe Biden was the Democrat nominee. He wrote a book to help Joe Biden and hurt Donald Trump, and he calls himself a conservative. Well, what kind of conservative would support a person who supports this? The monsters in the classrooms with our children, or would support a president who was about to lose in Afghanistan. This is what happened because, well, John Bolton helped the other side. You can make the case that he's responsible in part for what happened in Afghanistan. How about that? That book. So why did President Trump team up with John Bolton? Again, I'll get to that in a little bit. I really do think, though, as far as governing, as far as foreign policy, it may have been a masterclass, just awesome move by President Trump because John Bolton is crazy. I'll get to that in a moment. Now, the whole thing about the book should not have been written because it's jam-packed with classified stuff. And it's, you know who's saying that? This guy, a federal judge by the name of Royce Lamberth. John Bolton accepted a role as National Security Advisor in April of 2018. Check me out on the timeline here, all right? Okay, it goes through the basic facts first. Next, if you don't mind, he was entrusted with countless national secrets and privy to sensitive dealings. Yeah, it's a big job. Keep going. He left his position September 10th, 2019. And then what happened? Within 2 months, Bolton had secured a book deal with Simon & Schuster. Okay, and in December of 2019, Bolton submitted a draft manuscript, 500 pages long, to the National Security Council for publication review. They got to look to make sure there's nothing secret in there. Bolton likely published classified materials. The government is likely to succeed on the merits. Bolton may indeed have caused the country irreparable harm. Wow. Next, please. Bolton has gambled with the national security of the United States. He has exposed himself, his country to harm and himself to civil and potentially criminal liability. This is bad, bad stuff, man. And they tried to stop it, but they couldn't. Now, there is classified stuff in there. I'm not going to, even though the book has been published, I'm not going to put the word out. But he wrote notes which were classified, and he put them right in his book. It's indisputable, and the judge said so. The only reason why they let the book be published is because they already put out thousands of copies of that book. Next, please.
Is this a strategy or a slip-up? The notes of National Security Advisor John Bolton were caught on camera as he was speaking with reporters about the crisis in Venezuela, and he was holding this pad with the words 5,000 troops to Colombia written on it.
Now, when this happened, he was the National Security Advisor. Washington acted like it was cute because Bolton, I believe, was a big-time leaker. He obviously hated Trump, and they were taking care of him. And they thought maybe he was just leaking this to the entire world. That's a problem. D.C. may have found it cute, but our adversaries and our allies and a lot of other people were deeply confused. Take a look at the international media's reaction.
Durante la conferencia de prensa en la Casa Blanca hoy, el asesor de Seguridad Nacional John Bolton compareció con un cuaderno de notas amarillas en el que podía leerse 5,000 soldados a Colombia. La oración estaba escrita a mano. Bolton, al igual que otros funcionarios del gobierno, han dicho que todas las opciones en contra del régimen de Maduro están sobre la mesa, lo que dejaría abierta la posibilidad de una intervención militar. La Casa Blanca dice que no va a elaborar sobre lo que eso significa.
I don't know what he was talking about, but it sounded pretty intense, right? I mean, this made major news, and they were thinking about sending 5,000 troops, possibly. It wasn't anybody's business, but John Bolton made it everybody's business because he didn't think it was a good idea, and he wanted it out there, I believe, to kill the idea. So look, in this book, there are classified things all over it, and even though it's in the hands of 1 million people, I'm not going to repeat that classified information. I don't feel good about that. However, I will go through the book and point out that there are some, well, it's a very gossipy book, but for a man who's been hanging around the deep state for a long time, some of it is very telling and kind of helpful in a strange way. For instance, John Bolton identifies, he comes out against Trump first and foremost. Okay, facts are blunt instruments, and a mountain of facts demonstrates that Trump is unfit to be president. Okay, he says this every day on cable TV. This is the thing. Clientitis, he calls it. It's a chronic State Department affliction where the foreign perspective becomes more important than the U.S. concern. Isn't that interesting? Clientitis. And it is a chronic State Department condition where they think the other countries are more important than the American countries. That's kind of interesting. Here's a little tidbit about Nikki Haley. You remember her? Nikki Haley. Rex Tillerson hated Nikki Haley, and quite frankly, everybody else did too. Here's what he said about Nikki. There's a lot in there actually about Nikki, but this is just a tidbit. Tillerson laughed. It was clear he had not spoken with Haley about their relationship and that he had no idea how to handle this ticking time bomb. Nikki Haley didn't know anything about anything, and she was always making mistakes, but wasn't aware that she was making mistakes, and a real high-maintenance character. What else was in this book that's kind of interesting and weird? Air Force One, America's plane, right? You know President Trump wants that one from Qatar, and we better get one quick. We need a new one. We need a better one. This is me on Air Force One in 2005, I think. You know, when I was on that plane, it was an old plane back then. And when you sat down on the seats, they weren't that comfortable. A regular, like, business class seat folds into a bed. the ones on Air Force One don't fold into a bed. Look at this. Even the ones in the front of the plane. Next, if you don't mind. Except for POTUS, the president, Air Force One is not designed for luxury travel with no lie-flat seats. And many people simply stretched out on the floor. Can you imagine that? The Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Defense sleeping on the floor. Businessmen going to London right now are lying down sleeping. And I think the business of America is a bit more important than that. Oh, here's something else that's in there, and I did not like Mattis. General Mattis, remember him? He had a great reputation for a time, overblown. He kind of crafted this weird cult of personality, Mattis did. All kinds of dirt in here about Mattis. Bolton doesn't like him either. Hit it. Mattis was looking for excuses not to do much of anything. Mattis had stacked the options presented to Trump in ways that left little real choice. This is dangerous, actually. We'd experienced a classic bureaucratic ploy by a classic bureaucrat, structuring the options and information to make only his options look acceptable in order to get his way. How about that one? Is there more on that? No, that's it's a little trick. You know, you don't want the president, you want the president to do one thing, so you only give him one option and the other two stink, right? He was being manipulated by the deep state. How about this one? This is Kim Jong-un and President Trump at the DMZ. Now, what's his name? Bolton hated this, absolutely hated it, thought he was the guy who could solve North Korea. He looked to me like the guy who wanted to blow it up. I explained why and how a preemptive strike against North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs would work, how we would use massive conventional bombs against Pyongyang's artillery north of the DMZ, which threatens Seoul, thereby reducing casualties dramatically. You know, just like if we get to Baghdad in 20 minutes, they'll all fall and they'll throw flowers at us, right? Look, maybe we have to use weapons on North Korea someday, but if you're John Bolton, you really should stay the hell out of it. So, now the genius of Trump. Why did he pick this guy to begin with? I think this just might be the reason.
He was good in a certain way. He's a nut job. And every time I had to deal with a country, when they saw this whack job standing behind me, they said, oh, man, Trump's going to go to war with us. He was with Bush when they went stupidly into the Middle East.
It kind of makes sense, actually. And when you're reading this book, and John Bolton, no contrition over Iraq, talking about bombing North Korea, all this stuff he doesn't know anything about. We're going to pound him and pound him and pound him. Look, it's not right. I kind of hope he winds up in jail. I know I shouldn't, but I think he deserves it.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.